Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to do something very similar to our practice with the first topic, aggregate demand, but now we're going to practice with prompts related to aggregate supply. Then we're going to finish with a series of guided questions that relate to shifting long-run aggregate supply. So let's get started. Okay, so the first part here gives us that prompt, and then we're asked which of the shifters of SRAS is it, right? I know we have IRAP here, but we're going to actually use the words resource costs and productivity. That's because these are not official abbreviations, right? So we don't want to use IRAP as abbreviations. These are not official abbreviations. So we don't want to use these IRAP abbreviations. They're more just like how we actually can remember what they are. Grain prices rise to the war in Ukraine. That's a resource. And if its costs higher, then that's going to make resource costs higher, right? So I am just going to abbreviate that. If resource costs are higher, that's going to reduce SRAS. It's going to make it go down. Job training increases labor productivity. So this is obviously productivity, a relatively easy one to spot. And if it's more productivity, then it's more SRAS. Congress cuts environmental regulations, right? Think about regulations as costs. So it's resource costs. If we were cutting, say, environmental regulations, it might be cheaper to extract resources and then make it cheaper to produce, which would increase aggregate supply. Higher inflation is widely expected. Now, this one is often very tricky because the first words here, higher inflation, we know that price levels don't shift the curve. But this isn't actually saying that prices are changing, right? This is not saying price levels increased. This is saying it's expected. And the difference here is that if we expect the inflation, then the workers and the suppliers are going to go to their bosses and their relative kind of their kind of network that they're in, and they're going to say, I need a raise, right? If you're a worker and you think inflation's coming, you know nominal minus inflation equals real, and so you're going to demand higher wages. Those higher nominal wages means higher resource costs, and so that's going to drive SRAS down, right? It's going to reduce SRAS. So inflationary expectations can actually cause a shift in aggregate supply, even when the inflation itself doesn't cause a change. I know that that seems like we're splitting hairs here, but it really makes a fundamental difference. One of them is saying that within the model, just the inflation is changing. The other is saying that people's thinking about inflation is changing, and that's actually going to trigger a change in true resource costs. That resource availability is what's really driving SRAS. Union membership declines nationwide. Now, this one is a tricky one because often you don't make this connection, but this is connected to wages, right? Linked with wages. And we'd say if there's fewer wages, then wages would go down. Or sorry, fewer unions or lower union membership, wages would fall, and that actually makes resource costs cheaper. Resource costs are going down. So that makes SRAS increase. So thinking about the price of the resource, or the resource costs, right? In this one, there's increased resource costs. In this one, there's decreased resource costs. In this one, there's higher resource costs. In this one, there's lower resource costs. So it's a matter of kind of seeing what happened to those costs of the inputs. Fracking drives down energy costs. So again, lower resource costs. And that's going to cause SRAS to increase. Labor productivity, again, the other one falls, right? Productivity, and we can use an abbreviation there, just kind of shorten up the word. If productivity is falling, then we're going to decrease SRAS, right? There's a direct connection between productivity and resources, or with SRAS, sorry. Oil prices rise, so that's going to be a resource, right? And that's going to be a higher resource costs. And sometimes it is helpful if you actually just include the up arrow, down arrow with resource costs, because it can be a little bit mixed up because you're thinking higher costs, but why is there still less supply? Fundamentally, though, remember, microeconomics taught you that cost of production is one of the key shifters of supply. If it's more expensive to produce, what's going to happen? There's going to be less supply. And that's really what this is just saying. If it's more expensive to produce, then there will be less aggregate supply when we're talking about more expensive to produce everything. Price levels rise at an expected steady rate. So this one is the no change. It would be a quantity of SRAS would be changing, but no change to the overall actual SRAS, right? So when we say that price levels are rising at an expected steady rate, you would just be moving up an SRAS curve. Right? You would just be going from like here to point here on that. And so you could say quantity of SRAS increases, right? But not actually the SRAS curve itself. Congress votes to expand immigration. Well, how does that affect any of this stuff? You can think about resource costs. It's going to drive down resource costs. And so it's going to make it cheaper to hire workers. Think about wages, right? Wages would go down when you have more immigration because there's more supply of labor. If there's lower resource costs, then SRAS should increase. Businesses invest in new machinery that increases their marginal productivity of their workers. And that's really tipping us off here. There's a connection here. Businesses are doing investment spending, and that's linking directly into the productivity of the workers. And so the productivity is what's actually driving the increase in aggregate supply. So more productivity, increase. But that connection point, we're going to come back and revisit at a later date, because very often we can get more productivity, which is the key to long-run economic growth, through investment spending on new machines and equipment and new construction. Artificial intelligence increases worker productivity. Again, here's another one. And this is another way, productivity, that we could get an increase in the permanent capacity of the economy. It's very exciting. It makes everybody's lives better off. So let's take a look at how that would actually work. Explain how a tax cut on firms buying capital equipment, right? These would be tools and equipment. How would that affect current and long-run potential GDP? Well, the first thing, what component of aggregate demand is affected by the tax cut? CIGXN. Well, hopefully we know at this point that if we're buying new equipment, that's going to be investment. Investment spending. Now, because of that new equipment, how is aggregate supply increasing? Now, here's where it gets a little tricky, right? Initially, we know aggregate demand would increase, but this would actually cause more productivity. So new equipment, therefore new capital equipment, we can actually kind of say that. New capital equipment, therefore increased labor productivity. Or we could actually even just say resource productivity, right? Because new equipment is really just going to make all of our resources more productive. And therefore, we're going to see something else change, right? Because of that higher productivity, what's going to happen to more long run aggregate output? So it would be increased productivity, therefore increased long run output. So these are kind of a link chain, if you will. So the symbolic logic that we would kind of connect all of these would be to say, how would it affect current and long-run potential GDP? We would say the tax cut. So we have tax cut, therefore I increases, therefore productivity. Actually, let's include a little sentence right before that. Hang on. Therefore, capital stock. And this is really just saying how much we have increases stock. Therefore, productivity increases. Therefore, long run growth increases. We're going to use this kind of connection quite a bit. This is a tax cut on tools or equipment. Therefore, there's more investment spending. Therefore, there's more capital stock, more productivity, and faster long-run economic growth. So this is going to be a really, really important one. Key to know this one, this kind of link chain in this class. Lots and lots of questions are going to center on that sequence. So hopefully this helped you understanding kind of what might shift aggregate supply. It's really productivity and resource costs. I'll see you next time.